Hello and welcome to The Art of Aging, a part of our podcast series from the Center for Abundant Aging and United Church Homes. I love having conversation with others as we look at what it means to age in the 21st century, having positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire all to age with abundance. Today, I have the joy of welcoming Hannah Albers. Hannah serves as the Director of Program Development at the National Center to Reframe Aging, where she leads national strategies to transform how society understands and talks about aging. Her work centers on shifting cultural narratives, grounding communication and research, and equipping organizations across the country to advance age-inclusive practices. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be in the podcast with you, in the podcast booth with you.
Yeah, and it really is a joy to have Hannah here. I have gotten to work with Hannah and gotten to know her over the years. In full disclosure, I had the privilege of going through the national training, and I'm a facilitator with the National Center to Reframe Aging, and have been attending workshops that the center put on before the center even started, once the research first started coming out. But for the listeners, Hannah, who may not be familiar, would you share what the National Center to Reframe Aging does and your role as the Director of Program Development?
Happily. So the National Center to Reframe Aging, our work is really grounded in this idea that we're all aging, and how we think and talk about aging really shapes what's possible. It shapes the policies we write, the programs that we develop. So the National Center equips organizations and individuals nationwide with proven communication strategies to improve understanding of aging, improve that policy and program support that we need throughout our lives. And in my role as the Director of Program Development, I get to help figure out how do we translate this research, these strategies, to audiences in different arenas doing different types of work. What resources help contextualize these strategies in different advocacy settings, or different sectors, to really help bring clarity to what they are and how we can use them.
Excellent. So let's start with you. Now that we know a little bit about what the center does, how did you first enter the aging services field and what drew you to stay?
Gosh, this is a fun question to think back on, because I never imagined myself in aging services. But when I was in college, I participated in this fellowship program and took a placement with an organization because I wanted to learn more about philanthropy and what a career working in philanthropy might be. And that position happened to be at a senior living organization. And I got to continue working with them after I graduated, and really opened the doors. I think what drew me to stay is that there were so many more opportunities than I had given aging services credit for. And so in those early days, it was really, I got to do so many different things, which was really exciting. And I learned a lot. And I think since then, it's the warmth of this work, being surrounded by people that want to do good work, is something that I really connect to. And I being at the different meetings and conferences, working with folks like yourself, it provides a groundedness to it that I think is really feels really unique and special about this field.
Well, and particularly the work of the center, this isn't just about aging services, because as you said, we all are aging. And so even though there is a bit of a focus about ageism in later life, but it really can affect all of us. We all are aging and we can all experience ageism at any point. So who were the mentors that shaped you most in this work, and how did they invest you, and how has that influenced what you're doing today?
Yeah, so my first ever boss, Catherine, she's the continues to be a mentor to me, and Larry, who is the boss I had after Catherine retired, are two people that I still look to for um, leadership, how to lead. And there was what really shaped me, especially early on, as the kind of first two bosses that I had in my professional career, is that they gave me a seat at the table, not as an observer, but as an active contributor. And I think I appreciate that more even now, looking back on that, what that
Mhm.
allowed me, and the confidence that that helped build in me, that I not only had ideas, but those ideas were worth sharing, and worth investigating more, even if they weren't always well polished or as thought out as we could get them. But I think they helped, they allowed me and presented me with opportunity in ways that continue to be really valuable to me today. And I think the other thing that I learned in different ways from each of them was patience. I worked there as an intern, and then uh, spent the first 6 years of my career with this organization. And there were conversations I remembered that summer, during that summer internship, that kind of came full circle 5 years later, um, and really helped me understand the value of patience, that institutional change is incremental and it takes time, and that you can kind of push that and have some eagerness behind that, but to not be defeated when it doesn't happen overnight, which I think is really, really valuable, and something that I feel incredibly grateful to have learned relatively early on, in my career.
And I would imagine that that's really helpful for you in this work with the National Center, because we're trying to, reframe how an entire culture talks about aging and how we think about it. And um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's no small feat.
and
It's
it's
not.
not going to happen fast, and it's really easy to get frustrated. And yeah, yeah. The other thing I'm struck with is you talk about, as being an intern and then your first 6 years, and you're talking about your bosses in that Catherine retired from that role, and you are working in a place where there were people who were older, beyond the having full-time employment and later in life. How do you how has age diversity help you or at times hurt you in your career?
Oh gosh. Well, I've always worked on an intergenerational team. Even now, right at the National Center to Reframe Aging's team is very age diverse. And that is such an incredible gift. And I think there's a certain kind of perspective, that that comes with that, because
Mhm.
you get to work in that age diverse team. So I've appreciated it. What I find really interesting, especially when I started working full time with the National Center in this reframing aging work, is kind of overcoming. Maybe it's my own internalized ageism, but also what I felt from the field is, um, when we talk about owning our age, I always really struggled with that, because I never wanted to be seen as the kid in the room, oftentimes because I was frequently the youngest in the room. And so I spent most of the last 10 years of, and first 10 years of my career, masking how young I was, because there was a certain uncomfortability that I had. And again, I think part of this is my own perceived vulnerability that comes with that, but also knowing that I didn't want to be seen as like the kid at the table. But anyways, so I think it's been an interesting, like, the age diversity, um, is one of the greatest gifts. I'm grateful that I have had that experience and have that experience. Um, but it also has presented these funny little conundrums, especially as someone that gets to talk about ageism on a daily basis, that I am frequently kind of thinking about how that's internalized within myself.
I can so relate to that, Hannah. I went to graduate school to seminary right out of college, and there were maybe 4 of us at the seminary who did that same cohort. And, and even 42 years ago, the average age of somebody in that program was about 40, and these were women. And um, I looked, my parents, everyone used to say they didn't look their age. So even though I was, 21, 22, I still looked like I was 18. And, and, and I was also experiencing direct comments to me. Well, seminary can't be nearly as valuable to you as in your 20s as it is for me and I'm 40 because I've lived life and all you've done is work in McDonald's. And I had to confront some colleagues in a small group to say, hey, wait a minute, you know nothing about my life experience. I've never worked at McDonald's. And that was my first real experience of ageism, and that's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about it, and always making sure to mention that we can experience it at any point across the life course.
Yeah, I think, and that's something I have reflected on some too, is that I think that I say when I started getting gray hairs, I was kind of excited because I'm like, okay, I'm
Me
finally
too.
gonna, yes, I'm gonna appear a little bit older, which feels more comfortable. I remember when I turned 30, I had friends that are like, oh, how do you feel about this? And I said, I'm genuinely so excited because I feel like I'm finally the age that I've been pretending to be for the last 5 to 6 years, and I've arrived. I've made it. And but it really does highlight, and one of the reflections that I have, and our work at the National Center is focused on ageism directed towards older people, and that's certainly a different experience, and it's throughout our life, and
Yeah.
we feel it and experience it in different kind of unique, sometimes subtle, sometimes very overt ways. um, and I think that, again, that those two perspectives come also from that having an age diverse group of people working on this, because you can share those experiences in different ways when you have that diversity there, which is so important.
Yeah, and my experience has really shaped how I try to be very intentional in my professional relationships with people who are younger than I am, because
Mm,
I don't ever want to be in a room where somebody else is making a comment about how young that person is, or all the ageist little things that can come out, and it's like their age has nothing to do with it, and really trying to yeah, to be a
yeah.
person in the room to lift that up. So, coming back to the research of the center, which began in 2015, how have things evolved since then? I know that I have seen changes in the materials that have come out from the National Center over the course of the past 11 years. I remember downloading the first swamp is the way is the way the initial metaphor that we were using to talk about the things that exist in the culture that we need to kind of wade through and try to avoid. And we don't talk about the swamp anymore, which I'm very grateful for because it was really hard to explain to other people. But how have you seen the evolutions and changes in how organizations understand or adopt their reframed language?
Yeah, that is so funny. I remember the swamp too and learning about the swamp. But I think that example in and of itself illustrates that language is always evolving and we're
Yeah.
evolving with it, which is very much the experience I think that the National Center has had. And part of that, I first was introduced to the work in 2018, so kind of the early days, um, but more formally involved starting in 2020. Um, but talking with Trish D'Antonio, my colleague, who's the executive director of the National Center, she's reflected those early days, 2015 to 2019, 2020, was really figuring out what is this? Right? We have this research now, these are strategies, but how does that actually translate in use? And I think that has continued to inform the evolution of the work. Is the more people, the more we teach it, the more we understand about it, the more people use it, the more we see it evolve and can adapt with the strategies. I think one of the really exciting evolutions that we've seen, and I've heard people reflect to us, and we even learned when we did a 10-year evaluation since the research was initially done, is that we've come a long way, especially in aging services. That one of the initial findings of this research that we did was aging services experts. We were getting in our own way, and I think we're beyond that now. That within aging services, there is a much broader awareness of what reframing aging is, and even more importantly, what ageism is. Um, Beth, you might even be able to answer that better, but than I can. But even having conferences now in aging services that have large themes, that ageism is one of those themes, is incredible. That's not something we saw
Yeah.
10 years ago, or 12 years ago. And so I think that evolution within aging services has been really exciting. And some of how we're even more recently in the last year or so seeing is, okay, now how do we, now that aging services is such a champion of this and the field kind of is behind it, how do we bring more people into the work who might be age adjacent, so that it's not just the Department of Aging at a state agency level that's paying attention to this, but the Department of Transportation and Housing and Commerce and etc. all realize that they're allies in this work and have a part to play in it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've, you know, in aging services, we have come a long way, and we still wrestle with it because um, it's still not common necessarily in the culture around us. And so, you know, still have this tug of, particularly related to any kind of um, presence we have on the internet, and in recognizing, you know, our folks say, well, we have to use certain words because when people do a Google search, they're going to say senior citizen. They're going to say, you know, some of the other terms that we've really kind of, the research has shown we should move away from. And it's like, yes, and we're also trying to change the culture as well. And how, and it's a real tough balance, kind of back and forth with those things.
Yeah, the tug and pull there is really challenging, and I think that's some of what we're still learning. Right? That, I mean, in so many conferences, it's part of what I hear us in the field asking questions about is how do we get this beyond the choir, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the choir gets it. Like we have the same song book that we're singing from now. How do we make sure we're that translates external to that? And I think that's part of the continued evolution of this work, is the more and more people I've shared, and I think it's important. I believe every reframing aging has a place everywhere.
yeah,
Every organization, every person, every role, um, there is opportunity, and everybody has a way to contribute to that. And how that what that looks like is going to be different, based on all of those contextual factors, but everybody has a part to play. And I what I see the national centers work and my work really figuring out, how do we help people see that they have a role to play in this.
yeah. I was in a meeting in the last year, and with a national organization, and somebody said, "How come we're still talking about ageism?" shouldn't we be just talking about aging well and age positive things? And it's like, yes, and ageism still exists. We can't stop talking about ageism because it is so multi-layered, intrapersonal. I mean, we all have messages. Um, the way we relate to each other within our systems, and so um,
It's in, yeah,
yeah.
it's insidious. I got a message yesterday from someone saying, "Hey, I saw an organization that I'm a part of, not not a part of aging services, but they were talking about the silver tsunami. How, do you have any advice on how to respond?" Right? I think of a fellow facilitator colleague, Rajan,
Mhm.
out in Minnesota, and when I've facilitated workshops with him before, he's always says, I do a Google search the day of or the day before just to confirm that this indeed is a phrase that is used, because especially when you're, again, within the aging field, we've moved beyond that in a lot of ways. It's not perfect, but that's
Yep,
okay.
yep,
It's never going to be perfect. We've moved beyond that. But that doesn't mean that everyone else has moved with us.
yeah,
Um, and so figuring out how we continue to make advancements while ensuring that we don't forget the path that we came from,
yeah, yeah.
and what we learned in that process to bring other people along, I think is going to continue to be really important. Um,
And one of the things I appreciate, and it always amazes me with the work of the center, is um, that you and Trish, and whenever we gather and we're taking a look at examples, um, and there have been multiple times recently when we were shown like a paragraph, this is what it looked like before, and then when we apply the research, this is what this paragraph looks like now. And in the midst of the conversation, somebody will point out, yes, and this word or this phrase still kind of leads towards ageist attitudes and beliefs. And so I'm amazed and in awe. And it's really, I think, a nice example to the rest of the world about how you continue to evolve. There's a concept called I think it's called gracious space,
mm,
and it has to do with leadership and groups. And one of their marks of providing gracious space is being able to learn in public. And so, yeah, the research has been done, and that's been done ethically and privately with small groups and individuals. And the center is willing to say in public, okay, this was our best example, but yeah, it can be improved. And I think that lends to the graciousness for everybody to say, we're all on this journey, and none of us have arrived, and there's always room to get better.
which is so important because I think this work, um, there's a simple complexity to it that
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate. And there's a depth that comes with that. But that depth is only realized when you can say, and I've learned to embrace the copy edit in the middle of a presentation, because to me it illustrates what we're trying to say is that, one, don't let perfect be enemy of the good. It's an overused cliche, but it's so important. It's one of the golden rules of this work, that we're trying to make it, we're trying to progress. We're not trying to get it perfect. Um, and two, that language is evolving.
Yeah.
And I'll remind folks, I get to think about reframing aging every day, but I don't get to think about senior living every day. Or a couple of weeks ago, I was with a group of volunteer leaders, who are ombudsmen and working at senior centers and AAA's. I'm like, I don't get to do that every single day. So you have the expertise and the knowledge about that work that I can't bring, it in the same way, which I think is so important to say. Yes, there's and anyway, so I've learned to embrace the copy edit in the moment, because I think it's so illustrative of what we're trying to communicate at the National Center. And the other piece that you highlighted really well is inviting people in. That we try, instead of doing call outs, trying to invite people into the work and understand what unique role that they have in contributing to it, I think is really valuable, um, as we continue, especially as we move beyond aging services and groups who kind of instinctually get it in a different way. I think it'll be really, continues to be a really important aspect of the work.
And one of the exciting things for me is I think about what my observation of this work from outside of the center. Originally, it was so focused on communications and marketing and how we talk about this. And it was probably 2019 or 2018 before either of us had been through the training. Beth Kowalczyk and I did a workshop together for the Ohio Area Agencies on Aging annual conference. And we were using the work of the center. And I can remember one of the individuals, social worker, raised their hand and said, "Yes, this is really nice, but what do I say to the people who are sitting across the desk from me?" And so one of the things I appreciate is that we're moving the work into that space, and it's not just about publications and written pieces and communications, formal communications, but the adjacent work, and how does this affect the work of practitioners and those who are working hands-on with people. What do you see the biggest needs or gaps moving into the future? And you may have already answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway.
No, I think it's a really good question to be thinking about, and one, there's so many. I would say there's ample opportunity. There's ample examples that we have of where ageism sneaks in, how that's affecting healthcare delivery, how that's affecting community development, how that's affecting workplace. I mean, you can people can share examples across the board, which means that there's ample opportunity for reframing aging in all of those spaces. Um, I think one of the biggest pieces, and one thing that I is getting beyond aging services, which I kind of already shared earlier, but how do we get the, and I think we're making progress this, and maybe that's why I'm kind of leaning into that, is because I've seen it happen, where we've been in a workshop with communications professionals from across state agencies and had someone in the workshop from the commerce department say, a lot of our entrepreneurs in our state are over the age of 55, which means that our content is relevant to them as well. And we don't necessarily need to shift it all that dramatically, but maybe we need to diversify the pictures of people that we're using to showcase who's an entrepreneur. And to me, that's where we have so much richness and depth in bringing other people who don't necessarily see themselves as anybody who will ever be a part of aging services or the aging field,
Right.
and yet they are. And
yes, we're all aging.
We're all aging every single day. Full circle, Beth, full circle. So I think the more that we can bring awareness that everything we do, in creating age friendly, we're really creating friendly, age inclusive work, the better off we'll be. So I'm excited. I think part of that's an opportunity is because it really excites me, because I know it's possible. I've seen it happen.
So is that what gives you energy to keep moving this work slowly forward?
What gives me energy are the light bulb moments. I live for those light bulb moments.
Yeah.
The the moment you can see it clicks for someone, and you're
Yeah.
like, yes, you get it. It might have taken, you know, 3 conversations, or it might have been 5 minutes into a presentation or a workshop. However, everybody's journey into that kind of clickable moment, that light bulb moment, is a little bit different. But those are the moments I really live for, and that in this work that really excites me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't know if I told you the story. I did a workshop in a congregation last year, and I always begin with ageism, and in talking about the myths of aging, which I'm really talking about the traps or the general narratives that exist in the culture, and that they're myths. They aren't true. And we took a break, and this woman came straight towards me. I was up front, and she said, she told me her name. She said, told me her age. She was latter half of her 80s, and she said, I have believed all of those myths, and you're telling me they're not true. I said, nope, they're not true. She had the biggest smile on her face. She's like, wow. She was so engaged for the rest of the day. So I'm with you. Yeah, those light bulb moments are magical.
They really are. And even in a webinar yesterday, someone reflected, who had gone through some education, and they had done these projects afterwards. And she said, I really realized that it's small shifts have big change. And that was so gratifying to me, because I'm like, yes, that's it. It's it might not be seismic, but it feel like, when I hear someone say that, I'm like, oh gosh, you get it. And
So how do you intentionally create that opportunity for those shifts to happen?
the two things that I would say are really important with that is giving people space to sit with it.
Mhm.
And I've always felt this way with the reframing aging work. I often share with groups, I find this cognitively very interesting. As an academic exercise, I think it's fascinating. I remember being at the Grant Makers and Aging meeting in 2018, and being at the session about reframing aging, and just being captivated by the idea that our language shifts understanding.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is amazing. More than that, it's when people use it that it really has an impact. And so what I found with groups is to give people space to kind of sit with that. Um, so one, you can start to contextualize it in the work that you do, to understand, okay, what is that before after example that might make sense for me in our work. And then I think the other piece of this is, it's oftentimes we're meeting people in their professional work environment.
Mhm.
But there's a personal reflective piece that this brings out in challenging how you yourself think about aging, and how that shows up, that can be really meaningful, I think, to sit with and reflect with. But isn't without its challenges. And so I think giving people space, to sit with it, to both think about this from a professional lens of, how does this inform the work that I'm doing, and getting at the underlying assumptions about aging that is driving that, is really important.
So I'm smiling because and she's listening. Ashley, my colleague, who's sitting behind the scenes here as we do this podcast, she just participated in the leadership program that the National Center, together with the Maine Council on Aging, do. It's an online opportunity, and she shared that she was in a you go into breakout rooms with another person, and one of those days she was actually in a breakout group with Rajan, who you mentioned a little bit earlier, and, and they both mentioned, golly, we didn't think this was going to involve so much personal reflection. But you can't talk about it in any other context with and then completely ignore the personal. So yeah.
Which is also what makes it, I think, so gratifying at times for
Yeah.
folks, is this isn't simply a, yes, as I said, most of the time we're meeting people in a professional setting, but there's a depth to it. I was earlier this year, I was asked, what's something that you wish more people understood about the work? And I think there's a depth to it when you give it space and time to really investigate it more.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is more than just stop using the word senior. Um, right? This is a shift in how people think about and relate themselves to aging and to older people. Um, One of my light bulb moments recently was talking. We've been doing work with a newsroom and sharing some of these principles and facilitating conversations. And it was maybe 2 or 3 times after we had met with this group that someone shared, it was a journalist who said, I get it. I think I don't need to just report on the challenges of aging. I can think about what cool things are happening, and new things that people are doing as they're entering older years. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. And I wasn't there copy editing this person's story, but it was a shift in an opening and a door opening
Yeah.
to a whole different set of stories that they could investigate and tell and showcase, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So what gives you hope about the future of aging in America?
What gives me hope about the future of aging in America? Well, one thing that I think is really exciting, is one thing that we talk a lot about in our work is the increased longevity that we've experienced. That this is we're gifted with more years of life, and I think one of the things that gives me hope is hearing conversations that we're having to say, how do we make sure that we all have access to not just longer lives, but quality of those years, and really understanding what can we do to ensure that longevity is equitably distributed, to as many people as possible. And that, hearing what we're doing, as a field to make sure that that is happening, is really exciting to me.
Yeah. I have a colleague, and 2 years ago, there was an event happening about an hour from where he lives, and that we were hosting, and Horizons of Aging Summit, and I invited him to come up. And it was by virtue. He was invited because of his role within another organization, and he was, I'm going to say early 40s, or just had turned 40 at the time. And I was talking to him yesterday, and he tells about having been at that event. And he went home and he called all his friends who were like in his age group, and he said, "Hey, y'all, we need to be thinking about aging now." And these are conversations not just for organizations, not just people who are older adults, but how do we include all ages into this conversation for that very thing. We're all going to be living longer lives, and we should not start to think about these when we're in our 60s, but we need to start thinking about this in our 40s. So, yeah.
And I think that recognition is one of the greatest gifts this career has given me so far. Is these are things to be thinking about, talking about now, as we prepare for those longer lives.
Yeah. So for listeners who want to start reframing aging in their own organizations or in their own lives, what's the first step?
Great question. I would say the first step is, find a buddy, find someone that will kind of endeavor on the work with you. Then find resources. The National Center to Reframe Aging has plenty of kind of on-demand resources that you can access, learn a little bit more about what reframing aging means. And then I think one of the first questions we ask groups that we work with is, what does that mean to you? Right? What does that what does that outcome look like? Where are we moving to, and how do we help you get there? And then always reach out to us if you have questions or ideas of who else needs to be kind of in the know, included in this work. But yeah, find your buddy, find the resources, and reach out, because this work is best done in community and connection with others.
Thanks. And I will reiterate the resources that are available on your website are great. And do you want to tell people what the website is so they can find them?
Thank you. Yes, www.reframingaging.org. And there's a resource tab that will take you to where you need to go. We also have an online learning hub where you can tune in to on-demand webinars or what's upcoming, to hear conversation about the work. Reframingaging.org.
Thanks. So, we've warned you. There are 3 questions that we ask of all our guests at the end of the podcast. So, are you ready for those 3?
I'm ready. I've been doing some reflecting on them, so
Okay.
I'm ready.
So, when you think about your own aging, what has changed about you, and what do you like about your older self?
I talked about this a little bit earlier, but one thing that I like about my older self is I have a comfortability in my age. I told the story of kind of turning 30 and feeling like I was finally the age that I've been pretending to be, my mid and late 20s. So I feel more at home in my age, which I've really embraced and enjoyed.
And what surprises you about what you're doing at your age right now?
Everything. When you would have asked Hannah as a junior, senior in college what she was going to be doing, I would have been living outside of the US, working in international development, doing something of that realm. And so, especially when I think about my professional life, it's almost everything is different than what I expected to be doing, but I'm really enjoying it.
Great. And is there someone that you've met or someone who's set an example that inspires you to age abundantly?
Yeah, so I actually thought of 2 names. I hope that's okay.
That's okay.
One person I've already talked about, Catherine,
Mhm.
who's my first boss, my mentor. And then the other person I thought about was a friend of mine from church, Gay. And both of them, I think, have shown me that I will always be learning. Um, I remember Catherine fulfilling a lifelong dream of playing the oboe. And when we were working together, she had this like giddy excitement about finally doing this. And Gay and I were in a book group together where we were talking about the segregationist history of our country. And this is a woman who helped racially integrate her neighborhood in the 1960s in DC. And she looked at us at the table and said, "I've learned so much from you all." And I was sitting there in awe thinking, what can you have to learn from me? I have so much to learn from you. So I've look at both of them and think, gosh, there's so much joy and excitement and humility that I have and what I don't know. And I'm excited for what I'm going to continue learning throughout my entire life.
I love it. Thanks. Thanks for sharing about Catherine and Gay. So, again, if anybody wants to be in touch, where can they find you or how can they reach you?
Yes, so please reach out. Go to the National Center to Reframe Aging's website, reframingaging.org. Find us on LinkedIn, the National Center to Reframe Aging, which is also where you can find me. Would love to connect and learn about the work that you're doing and how we might be able to support it.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you to our listeners for your time with this episode of The Art of Aging, part of the United Church Homes Abundant Aging series. If you would like to participate in additional conversations about around aging abundantly, you can visit us at abundantaging.org. In the meantime, may you look around you and identify a person who is aging ahead of you, who influences your understanding of how you can age abundantly by their aging example. And until next time, blessings.